Many times you want to save the output that your program generates. Instead of just writing it to the screen, then you want to write it to a file somewhere so that you can have the output and keep that as long as you want. So that's what this program is going to do. It's going to introduce how to use a file to record the information that your program generates. We're going to use a program from an earlier video where we were looking at the manipulators, and they're listed up here. But this is a complete program, and in this program we had some prompts to the screen where we're asking for input for a fictitious employee. So we have some last name, first name, and so on. Then that input was received from the keyboard, and then it was formatted and printed back to the screen. So using this program now, let's modify it so that we can write that information out to a file. If you want to use a file, one thing that you have to have is the #include fstream header up here. So this will allow you to have all of the necessary functions available to write output to a file. Then inside your program, we're going to need some additional stuff to connect our program to that output file. So I've added a comment here, write employee data to a file. So let's look at what else we're going to have. If we're writing output, then we need to declare what is called a file pointer for the output. And we have special types for these file pointers. So we can use OFSTREAM. So that's a type. So that's an output file stream. And then you have to specify some variable name for that out file pointer. And I'm just going to call it out file. Okay, so that tells me definitely that this pointer is going to be for writing data to an output file. So what this does is it just declares a file pointer. And let's make that for output. Okay, if we want to read input, we'll have to do a different file pointer. So this declares a file pointer. That's one thing you'll have to have. Then the second thing that you'll need to do is to open a pathway to that file. So your program needs to connect to whatever device you're writing to. In order to make the connection, we have to use what we call an open statement. So after we have declared the file pointer, then we use that file pointer, out file.open. So we use the dot and we use the open right there. So this is going to open a pathway for the output to go to your file. Within the parentheses, you need to specify the name of the file. Actually, you should use the complete pathway. All right, so I'm running on a Windows machine, so I am going to use this notation. So on the C drive, / and I have a folder I named temp. And then I need to make a name for this file. So it's an employee information, so I'm going to call it employee.txt. So this will be a text file. Then we just put the semicolon over here to conclude the statement. Okay, so this opens a path for output. Okay, open a path for output. So this pathway then is going to be to in my case, the C drive, and you can open up a path to whatever folder you want to. Just make sure you specify it in double quotes in here. Now, this operation can sometimes fail. In fact, it's not unusual for this to fail. For example, if I didn't have a folder called temp, then this would not be a valid path. Regardless, whenever you open up a file, you should always test it to make sure it opened correctly. Make sure there are no errors. And it's easy to do. We can do an if statement, if not out file. Okay, if not out file, if I can type it correctly. So this is what we can use. Now, no semicolon there. The open operation on a file is going to return a code. So if it returns 0, then that means it's a failure. So 0 is false, so not false would be true. Okay, so that means if there was an error, then we'd get false, and then not false is true, so this statement would be true, and we would go inside the if statement. All right, so this means we had an error. So we need to tell ourselves that. So cout, okay, error, opening, output file, or put some message that you want there, then an end line. And what I want to do at this point, though, is I don't want the program to proceed. If I couldn't open the file, then there's no need to try to write to the file. So we will stop the program when that happens. Now, depending upon what system you're using, then you may or may not need to do this, but since I'm using Windows and I want my program to stop at this point and display the message, I am going to use this system pause. Okay, now, like I said, if you're using something different, you'll need to use whatever your system allows in order to halt the program at this point. Now, this will stop the program and it will leave my output screen up on my terminal, but then I don't want to go any further. Now, the system pause puts up the message, hit any key to continue. So it'll pause at this point. Then once I've read the message, I can hit any key, and then I want to do a return. Now, here I am going to put a return with a code of 1. That's not really that important, but whenever your program is executing and it does so correctly, then we have been putting a return 0 at the bottom. That means everything went well. So if there was an error message or some error condition, then I can return a different code than 0. So 1 means that the file did not open. All right, so now that is all we need in order to set up the file itself. So this information, we need to set the file pointer, we need to use the open, and then we need to check to see if we did have the file open correctly. Now, I like to put another statement here. If we get past this if statement, then that means the file was opened and we're ready to go. And now, I just like to have a response from that, so I'm going to put a C out here. Okay, double quote, file opened for write. Okay, and then an end line. So that just gives me the good feeling, hey, that my file was opened correctly and I'm good to go. Then we can proceed into the program itself. Previously, we had this information printed to the screen, and in this case, I do want it printed to the screen because I'm prompting the user to type in some information. So that needs to go to the screen, so that stays as it is. Then the CN statement reads in the data. Then we print out the information that was typed in. Now, instead of printing it to the screen, I want to print it to the file. So it's very easy to change what we have here, and we don't need to change very much at all. All we need to do is change the cout, which sends the information to the screen, so that it sends the information to a file. So for the cout statements, we will replace that with out file. That's all you need to do. So all of these manipulators still work. So set fill, left, set width, all of those things work on files just as they do when you're printing to the screen. So now I'm just going to quickly replace all of these couts with out files. Okay, so I'll just go down the list, copy and paste. And let's don't forget the pay at the bottom. Now, all of this information, instead of showing up on the screen, is going to be written to the out file. So I left this cout end line so that still goes to the screen, but now everything else goes to the out file. Now let's run the program and let's see how this works. The program's running. We have been prompted to type in some employee information. So let's type that in. Okay, let's click on the window and then let's type that in. Smith, okay, Julie, middle initial R, ID number 3421. Okay, let's say the wage is 25 and hours worked is 40. So now I will hit enter and notice that nothing comes back to the screen. It just says press any key to continue. So if we look back at the program, then you'll see that after we have entered the information, then everything else is now going to the out file. Okay, so all of these statements that I'm highlighting, those are writing the information that would normally go to the screen. We're writing that to an out file. All right, then we're at the end of the program here, and the system pause gives us the press any key to continue. So that's the end of the program. This time the data has been written to a file. So now let's go and find that file and take a look at it. I've navigated to the folder. So again, this is Windows, so this is a C folder, and I've got the temp folder here, and there's the name of the file. So I've written out the data to the C temp folder, and it's called employee.txt. And if I double click, I can open that up, and this comes up in a Notepad. So here you can see the output. So what normally would be written to the screen is now written out to the file. So the program, when the program terminates, then I've still got this file to show me what the program produced. So that's how you can write to a file. Now let's run the program again without making any changes at all, and let's put in data for a different employee. So I'm going to run the program, and let's type in data for another employee. Okay, so let's do, and once again I need to click in the window. Jamie, okay, Summers, middle initial E, ID 2345, okay, and then a wage, 25 and 40 is easy to do. So then I hit the enter key, and it says press any key to continue. So now this data has also been written to the out file. So let's look at the out file again. I've navigated to the folder, the temp folder on C drive. So you see we still have the name of the file showing up here. Let's double click. So Notepad pops up. And now we have the data for this employee, which is different than the one I just did previously. So what happened to the data that was in the file before? This now is the only data we have. The way that these file output operations work is if you have an existing file, called employee.txt in this case, then the new information will overwrite the existing information. So that's an important thing to remember here. Whenever you are opening a file for output, then you need to make sure that you're opening a file that doesn't exist, or you have protected that file in some fashion so you don't overwrite it. Otherwise, when you do the out statements, writing to a file, then it will overwrite the existing file that you have. Now let's look at a way that we can change that so that instead of overwriting, we can append to the existing information. If you want to append information to an existing file, then we can modify this open statement a little bit. Okay, so this opens a path for output, but if there's an existing file called employee.txt, then that file is going to be wiped out. So if we don't want that to happen, then we can add another argument over here after we put a comma, and we can append to that file instead of overwriting. So to do that, we do the input-output system, iOS, the double colon, and APP. So that means append. Okay, so append means we want to append this data to the existing file instead of overwriting it. Now, without changing anything else, then I'm just going to compile and run the program again. Now here we have the program. It's prompting us to type in information for an employee. So the last name. So let's make that Johnson, Lewis. Okay, middle initial K, ID number 4567. The wage 20 hours 40. Then the information was written to the file, not to the screen. So now let's go look at the file. So we go back to the temp folder, and here's the employee.txt. File name has not changed. I'll double click. This time, let's look at the output. So I bring this in, and you can see now that the data for Lewis Johnson is appended to the data for Jamie Summers. Wow. All right. So if you want to append when you run the programs, if you want to append the data to the file, then you can use that APP technique to do so. From this point onward, we can extend the file by putting as many employee records in here as we want to. Those will be appended below one another as I've shown here. So again, briefly, remember that if you're going to write to a file, you have to have the pound include fstream. These few lines you can copy and keep those in a safe place because it gives you the recipe for how to open a file. If you want to overwrite the file, then you can just use the pathway here. If you want to append to a file, you can add this onto your open statement. One more thing, if you only want to put the name of the file and not the entire pathway, then that's okay too. If you do that, then this file will be placed into the default directory that you're using on your computer for whatever development environment you're using. Now, the last thing that I want to show you, and you don't have to do this, but it's a good idea to always do so just to be complete, and that is you need to close the file when you're finished. And it's very easy. Just outfile.close and empty parentheses. So that will close the file cleanly. And if you want to be precise in your programming, then it's a good idea to go ahead and always do this. So close the file. All right, well, that's the basics for how to open a file for writing. So we will terminate this video here.